Good morning, everybody. Welcome to week 2 of your Fashion Textiles Pathway. And today, for your self-directed learning day, we're going to be showing you a bit about repeated pattern, and you're going to be making some repeat patterns of your own today. Now, repeat and pattern repeats are obviously quite crucial if you're going to be doing textile design, but they apply to every area of this particular pathway because you'll still need to learn how to make areas of pattern in design if you're working with fashion and promotion, and you're going to want to learn how to generate different patterns from key components to produce different garments within a collection if you are working in fashion design as well. So commercially, there is a lot of value to learning how to repeat patterns. It means that you only have to do a very small bit of design work. There's a small design outlay with infinite results, because if you are producing a repeated pattern design, it means you only have to draw a very small amount, but in repeating it, you get to cover a large surface area. So when you're working commercially and running a big textiles factory or producing reams and reams of printed paper in a repeat pattern, it's really useful to have to spend very little in the design work and then get a whole load of use out of it. There's less machinery or equipment required to produce a design if you're repeating the pattern instead of having to repeat lots of different motifs and designs all the way across the surface. Large areas can be covered with skillful joins. It's easy to market a design if customers can be confident in what it will look like. So you could show them a small sample and you can give them confidence that the whole rest of the thing is going to look exactly the same as that because it's a repeated pattern. And one main design can be turned into many different repeats in order to retail. So if you've got a really great big design and you pick out small elements of it, by repeating those, you're able to generate different textiles, different surfaces, different patterns that still correspond with the main one. So when you're producing a collection as a designer, that's really quite an important thing to be able to do. And when you're retailing design, that's really effective in being able to make even more money from the small bit of design work that you've created. Artistically, it's really useful to be able to repeat a pattern as well. Busy patterns can distract the eye or create blocks. A good way to create further coordinating designs and build a collection from one masterpiece is by, like I mentioned earlier, learning how to pull out motifs and repeat those into patterns to correspond with your main, very complicated and big design. Repeated pattern can be a way to discreetly and subtly deliver concept. So if you've got a bright idea or a narrative that you want to convey to your audience, you can hide that sometimes in a repeated print. It's a really consumable way of delivering information. We're used to repeated patterns, we're used to wearing them and not looking too hard at them. So if you want people to have something interesting in the form of your concept, you can sometimes disguise this discreetly in a repeated print. And repeat style can be another way to convey your concept as well. Through history, lots of different repeated textiles have very strong meanings or associations with different periods of time or different cultures. So these can be used to really sort of a great and effective degree if you're going to want to present some of those time periods or even contrast with them in your work. You can employ different types of repeated pattern to indicate when something is supposed to have been made or what kind of culture you're trying to express in your work. So some of the repeat essentials. Here I'm going to take you through the different types of repeat and some of the key words that we use when we're talking about repeated pattern design. And I've got some examples lined up as well to show you. And then at the end of it, you're going to pick a few that you're going to want to do yourself today. So some of the repeat essentials. We've got the repeat of the tile or the motif. Now that's our core ingredient in our repeated textiles. The motif is the unit of repeat. It's known as the tile, or sometimes if it's one object in isolation, it will be referred to as the motif. This thing that we see here, the daisy, that's more of a motif, but if we drew a box around that and we decided that was the only thing we were going to repeat, that daisy and that daisy alone, that will become our tile. And your tile is any area of design work that you've decided you're going to put into repeat. It doesn't always have to be in a square, but I think when you get started, it can be quite useful if it is. So these tiles are the design work for the repeat and can be as complicated or as simple as you like. A block repeat is where the motif or the tile is repeated directly on top of and next to itself with no overlap, just like this one here. So you go 100% across and 100% down, and wherever you go, they're stacked right on top of one another. Here's a couple of examples of block repeat in action. And even though the designs can be quite complicated, like this first one in the blue and the pink, the wobbly line makes it look like maybe there's lots of different types of tile being repeated, but you can see from the shapes that actually it's one shape that's been repeated lots of times. Brick repeat is where the tile is repeated in a row with the underneath row being half offset by 50%. You can spot this formation as it looks like it's bricks on a house. So you go across 100%, but then the second row underneath is actually only 50% shifted along and repeated in the same way that the block repeat is. So here we can see some different examples of brick repeat. We've got some nice Hello Kitty there, she's in a brick repeat, and even some of these kind of extended wave shapes, they're still in a brick repeat. So it's really effective for throwing off the look of repeat. It doesn't quite look like it's mimicking itself straight away. They're kind of nestled in amongst one another instead. It subverts and moves the eye around the print. Half drop repeat can be a little like the brick repeat, but on its side. This is where the tile has travelled 50% of its own width to the left or right, and then 50% of its own height up or down. So this is really effective because it definitely makes the eye flow around the page. Rather than just seeing stripes or lines, it feels much more organic and starts to disguise the joins that you might have in your tiles. So some good examples of where we see half drop repeat, which is something that comes we see quite a lot in all sorts of different textile design and fashion design and interiors as well, because it really starts to hide some of those joins. The first print on here with the partridges and the big leaves, it's not too obvious to see where the joins are, and the repeat is quite well disguised, so you can tell that that half drop repeat is working quite well. The spot or the dot repeat can be a little like the brick repeat, but with much more space around the motif. This is often used to make very simple prints, and with its wide spacing it has a lot of room for error. So just like the brick repeat, they go one across and then underneath they seem to be shunted along by about 50%, but the gaps in between them are so big that there's a lot of room for something going wrong, and maybe the print tile itself overlapping a little bit. You wouldn't notice it because there's so much negative space in the print. So some examples of the spot or the dot repeat here, just lots of spacing in between the motifs rather than being quite close together. The diamond repeat is a more obvious type of repeat where the motif is repeated within a tile to create a diamond shape, then used in a block repeat to create this type of grid or formation. So that sounds quite complicated, but really what we're doing is we're creating diamond shapes with motifs, and then we're sticking them next to each other to make this kind of trellis shape. So some different examples of types of diamond repeat are here. And you can see it can be, again, quite effective for helping your eye move around the page a bit or around the textile or the surface area without making you feel too much like things are in straight rows or anything like that. And then the stripe repeat are rows of overlapping or not motifs are used within distinctive spacing in order to make a stripe. This sequence could be offset with a second row of different motifs and or repeated vertically to construct a grid or a check. So here we're seeing loads of stripes, but if you repeated this going the other way as well, you'd get a grid, and you could even kind of shrink some of them down and put them in between to start to make something like a check. And you can see here some stripe repeats used really effectively. Even something like the watermelons, they repeat, but it's not as easy to see that they repeat because they change colour as they go, and it takes 4 or 5 to get back to the original one. And a random repeat is where motifs are distributed in a seemingly disorganised way. This repeat is used to hide the joins in the print, but in reality the motifs are still part of a larger repeating tile that is hidden well in the haphazard distribution. So this looks really kind of abstract and organic. You can't really tell maybe that there is a repeat, but all of these flowers that are placed in a really random way, they will still be contained within a repeat tile, ready to be kind of reproduced next to one another in a large scale repeat of its own. And here are some examples of random repeat. Each of these will show prints or motifs that look really randomly thrown around, but if we were able to zoom out, we would likely see that all of those random things start to repeat. If you pull back further enough, further enough, and you're able to see where the tile is, you'd start to spot where the repeat was. So some tips for when you're designing your own repeat print, using some of the techniques or the layouts that we've just seen. Consider working onto tracing paper in order to overlap your repeat tile. Rotate your motifs within your tile in order to make your repeat multi-directional. So that will be where you would have some of them looking like they're facing upright, but then maybe you twist some of them around. And you do that within your repeat tile because, of course, you need your tile to be exactly the same every time you use it. So you could still do a bit of repeat and moving around within that tile area. Once your motifs are stuck down, try drawing between them in repeat to blend the boundaries between the tiles. So when you're generating some repeat designs of your own today and you're cutting away some of your drawings that you've done already, all of those repeated photocopies that you've done, when you cut them out and start to put them down onto a large page in your own repeat formation, you could decide when you're really happy with them, stick them down, and then start to draw some joins in between them. Maybe have shapes arching from one motif to another to kind of blend the boundaries a bit. Now, of course, if you draw anything on that page, you're going to have to repeat it all over the page, but it can make for a really interesting kind of overlapping of designs if you start to repeat new patterns on top of them and see if you can get the thing to blend a lot more. Consider which repeat style works well with your concept. So perhaps the narrative that you're working with over the next 4 weeks or 3 weeks is something to do with the idea of a very rigid journey or very strict travel. Then perhaps your repeat design is going to be something that's really, really straight and strong and organised and graphic. Whereas if you were doing something that was really meandering, really organic, really had a lot of flowing movement, maybe you'd want to try and do some of that within your repeat pattern design. You can even try mirroring within your repeat or your repeat tile, simply by creating something on one side of your tile and mirroring it on the other. So here are some examples of rotated repeat, where your tile is moved around to create different compositions, and then those new forms will be repeated in your tile. And some examples of mirrored repeat as well, some really contemporary ones from Holly Fulton in the form of the dress, but equally William Morris, really, really traditional textile designer, and he would have used a lot of mirroring and half drop repeats within his designs. So how to use a repeat in your work? Textile designers use repeat to create lengths of printed textile designs or collections of related textile designs. Fashion designers use repeat to take textiles from existing prints and generate new ones for garments in a collection. Fashion promoters will employ repeat to add detail and pattern to areas of their visual work. Hair and makeup students will be working with the symmetry of the body and will often have to repeat or mirror techniques. And costume students will employ knowledge of period textiles and their repeats to add layers to the concept of their characters. So things to remember from what you've seen in the PowerPoint today. However many parts or individual motifs it has, your design will always need to be grouped into a tile, and this will be like an imaginary tile, or you can sort of cut a little square out of paper and build that up if you like, so that you can repeat it. The way that you repeat your tile will dramatically change the way your pattern outcome looks. You can repeat within your repeat tile, so that's not to say that you couldn't rotate things, move them around, overlap them, all while you're working within that one set space ready to repeat it. Or you can overlap your tiles in your repeat. You can use hand or computer techniques today, so by all means you can go ahead and create things on Photoshop, or if you want to do it entirely by hand, that's a really great technique as well. In the end, you're going to want to make sure you've got a body of work that represents the whole day. So your work for the day is as follows. Your task is to use your existing drawings or motifs that you have photocopied to explore some of the structures you have learned here and create 5 repeat ideas of your own. Evidence these with good, clear photographs, and then choose your favourite 3 of the repeats you've made to glue down onto paper and refine or add detail with colour and pen or paint. You're welcome to use the computer to do this. You can also redraw your tiles if you don't have enough photocopies. The task simply needs to reflect a day of work in repeat. So by the end of the day, you will have achieved 3 interesting, diverse and detailed repeat patterns that you've made by hand and stuck down onto a large piece of paper, coloured in, drawn into, and really kind of finished off and elaborated, that show what you have discovered by watching this PowerPoint. And these will all be made using your own work as well, all those photocopies that you've done in preparation. You will also have photographs of the paper repeat experiments that you started with before you chose your favourite to glue down and refine. So before you get sticking for your 3 final ones, move them around a lot, your motifs that you photocopied. Try out lots of different repeat pattern designs that you've seen in this PowerPoint. See what you think of them, take some photographs, spread them out, group them up, overlap them, rotate them, experiment in loads of different ways and take lots and lots of photographs so that you've got some great evidence of really exploring pattern and repeated pattern before you decide which 3 you like the most and you're going to stick down and develop.